Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mayor. Hi, Kristen.
Good morning.
Lois. Hi. Hi, Nancy, Ryan. Nicole, hi. And Jennifer. Lots of folks.
Good morning.
It's nice to see such um, a nice, interested community. This is fantastic. I love it. Good morning, David. Hi, Bob. Hi, Matt. Nice. Morning, Jennifer. Good. It's fantastic. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for another installment of Economic Alliance Snohomish County's Coffee Chats. I'm your host, Wendy Poischbeg. I'm the interim president and CEO of Economic Alliance Snohomish County. This installment of Coffee Chats is brought to you by Desimone Consulting Group, offering public affairs, government relations, and communication advocacy services in the Pacific Northwest and Washington, D.C. This morning, we are joined by legislators to delve into the session's outcomes and how results may impact Snohomish County businesses and communities. We would like to remind all of you joining us today via Zoom to please drop your name and organization in the chat and use this opportunity to make connections. To participate in this vital conversation, please join me in welcoming Washington State Representative Strom Peterson, representing the 21st Legislative District. Representative Peterson, thank you for participating today. Next, join us in welcoming Shelley Helder, state lobbyist with Gordon Thomas Honeywell. Shelley, thank you for being here this morning and for lobbying on behalf of Snohomish County businesses throughout this session under the guidance of our EASC VP of Public Affairs, Rashma Argawal. Lastly, Senator Marco Leas will be joining us on the program shortly. Marco represents the 21st Legislative District, also in Washington. To set the tone for today's discussion, Shelley Helder will kick us off with a brief overview of the session. Take it away, Shelley.
Good morning, everyone. Good to be with you all. So I, as Wendy said, have the privilege of serving as EASC contract lobbyist and representing the organization in Olympia. So I'm going to provide a very brief overview of the 2024 session and then leave plenty of time for updates from each of our legislators and then questions from you all. So the 2024 session was a short 60-day session, and the primary objective of the session was to adopt supplemental operating capital and transportation budget, the three budgets that the state has. And they accomplished that. So the operating budget is what funds all state agency operations, is appropriately named. That includes the K-12 education system, the behavioral healthcare system, housing and homelessness services, and much more. The supplemental operating budget increases spending by $2.1 billion, which brings the biennial operating budget to 71. The capital budget funds public and nonprofit construction projects. The supplemental capital budget increases investments by $1.3 billion for a biennial budget of $10.3 billion. There was very limited bonding capacity for a supplemental budget, so the majority of new spending is from the Climate Commitment Act revenues, as well as federal funds. Investments in the capital budget are made with Climate Commitment Act revenues that are projected to come in beyond the current calendar year are earmarked as contingent upon Initiative 2117 failing, since the act must be in place for the revenue to be collected. The third budget, the transportation budget, funds the state's transportation system, including highways, ferries, transit, and transportation-related state agencies. There is $1 billion of new spending in the supplemental budget, bringing the biennial transportation budget to $14.6 billion. The new funding is from the reappropriation of federal funds, Climate Commitment Act revenues, and increased overhead Washington account spending. But it is worth noting that traditional transportation revenue sources, such as the gas tax, vehicle and drivers, licenses, permits and fees, and ferry fares are down 56 million or 8% since the biennial budget was adopted. So although the supplemental budget does add some spending, it is not from our traditional revenue source. In addition to adopting the supplemental budget, the legislature introduced over 1,500 bills and 376 into law. In the final weeks of session, there were 7 retirement announcements, and several more legislators are running for other offices. I'm going to go quickly because I'm getting some very well. So let me see if this changes anything. Much better, I am hearing. Okay, well, let me, there we go. Okay. So EASC had 4 broad categories for our legislative priorities in the 2024 session. The first was competitive business environment, and there are 2 notable outcomes. There are much more, but for the purposes of brevity this morning, I'm just going to focus on 2. The first is a $676,000 increase in base funding for associate development organizations, which is what EASC is. Unfortunately, this increase will not result in an increase for EASC since we are one of the largest ADOs, and there is a statutory cap that was not adjusted with this increase. But this does leave the door open as an item to be addressed in the 2025 session. And it also means that the additional funding will be shared with other ADOs in the state. The second notable outcome is the defeat of House Bill 1893, which would have expanded uninsurance benefits for striking and lockout workers. This was a high priority for the business community to oppose, and it ended up dying with the second to last cutoff in session, which means it advanced really far through the process. And I just misspoke, unemployment insurance benefits to striking or lockout workers. The second category was workforce and talent, and some of the policies that we supported were reducing the cost of childcare to expand the availability of workers. And in that topic, the legislature passed Senate Bill 6038, which expands the business and occupation tax exemption for childcare providers and eliminates their annual licensing fees, so lowering the cost of running a childcare facility. The legislature also passed 3 more occupational licensing compacts for the 3 are social workers, physician assistants, and teachers. And these compacts are intended to streamline the process for individuals in those professions, so when they move to Washington, they can start working even faster. In the third category of infrastructure, the legislature passed House Bill 1870, which provides technical assistance to communities seeking federal funding. As many of you know, there is a lot of federal funding available, but it does require staffing and technical expertise to pursue, which is often just unavailable to smaller or medium-sized communities. And so House Bill 1870 is intended to help provide that technical expertise. And then further, the transportation budget does adjust the timing of funding for several projects in Snohomish County to align with where the project is at in development and the project timeline. In the final category of thriving communities, the legislature passed House Bill 2230, which codifies making permanent and improves the economic security for all grant program, which is a poverty reduction model that coordinates programs to help individuals move towards self-sufficiency.
And this bill was sponsored by Representative Peterson. So thank you very much for your sponsorship and leadership of that piece of legislation. The final bill that I'll mention is Senate Bill 5792, which updates the definition of multi-unit residential building. And the intent is to increase condominium construction. So that was a really fast and furious overview of the 2024 session and outcomes of EASC's priorities. But I wanted to leave as much time as possible to hear from our legislators.
Thank you, Shelley. Next, we will move into our Q&A portion of the program. Before we begin, we would like to remind all of you attending this installment of Coffee Chats via Zoom to please submit your questions that you wish for the panel to discuss in the chat, and we will relay the relevant questions to the panel, time permitting, of course. Rep. Peterson, let's start with you. Can you tell us what were some of your main priorities going into session?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks. Good morning, everybody. I think it has been stated, or I mean, not yet on this call, but around that this was, I think Shelley might agree, this was the longest short session, at least that I've been a part of. It was a grueling 60 days, and pleased with most of the work. And, you know, we left a few things on the table, but we'll be back. My priorities going in, well, as Shelley pointed out, I did have House Bill 2230 and some other poverty reduction work. So really pleased with that. As we know, families are struggling, and we have kind of a history in not only Washington State, but around the country of making it really hard for families that are struggling to access opportunities, either access funding, you know, simple funding from government funding, or programs like the Economic Security for All grants. So just making some of that easier is really bringing a lot of families out of poverty and giving them a chance to just get over that, whatever that hump might be, whether it's a broken down car or some medical bills. But if they can just access some funds, often they can just do that at a very temporary basis and really work their way out of it. Just a quick aside on the Economic Alliance, or on the Security Bill 22, whatever the number was, young woman came into my office, and one of the grants that she got was new tires for her car. So she was able to just go to work, right? And now she moved up here from California with her 3-year-old son, escaping a domestic violence situation. She lives up in Skagit County, but is now getting certification in interpreting services, which we desperately, you know, another thing we desperately need in kind of the job space. So these things really do work on the ground, and really excited about that. My focus primarily, I chair the Housing Committee. So really trying to address all of the housing needs that we have in our community. You know, last year we did an incredible amount of work on the supply side, passing the missing middle housing bill, lots of other bills around permitting. I know a lot of people on this call were super supportive of the work that we were doing there. This year we had a little more concentration on the sustainability side, on the stabilization side. And unfortunately, we couldn't quite get that through. So we had a rent stabilization bill that went much farther than it ever had in the past. We'll be back next year. We think that's to me, it's also a workforce bill to make sure that folks that are working for your companies really have an opportunity to work close to where they live, and they have a better way to budget for rent increases. If we can keep those rent increases reasonable, we've seen far too many cases of 20, 30, 40% rent increases on folks that have even been living in the same apartment for years and years. So we know the market is super tight. That's why we did the supply stuff first, to try to be able to expand that market. But we also know that construction takes time. So we're not going to really see the positive effects of the supply for another 5 years probably. And I think that's pretty aggressive when it comes to doing some of these bigger infrastructure projects. So yeah, in general, super pleased also with the budget work that was done, both transportation budget. Thank you, Senator Leas. The capital budget made some more key investments in housing, as well as some great projects throughout our community. And then I think our budget writers on the operating budget really got down really to help some of the families and communities that are struggling. Some really great money for asylum seekers and refugees, some money to backfill folks that are still struggling with paying rent to make sure that they and their landlords are made whole. So some really good work on the budget committee. Like I said, we missed, I think, a few opportunities on the policy side, but it was a 60-day session, and we will be back before we know it, probably. So, but I appreciate the work from this group and the advocacy, and Shelley always does great work. So thanks everybody again for being here.
Thank you. And Shelley does do great work. Good morning, Senator Leas. Thank you for joining us. Let's lob one over to you. How would you characterize this short session? What was the biggest challenge from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest challenge facing our communities right now is public safety, and I'm proud of the work we did around a couple of important investments and measures to help make our communities safer. We are all seeing the devastating and heartbreaking impacts of fentanyl in our county and in our communities, and I'm really proud, and hats off to our county leadership for making it a priority to, particularly in our K through 12 schools, get more information to our students about the risks of overdose and the risks of fentanyl. So we passed that bill. We also added over $200 million in our budget for additional behavioral health treatment capacity to help folks that are struggling with addiction get back on the path to recovery. That's on top of over $200 million in the operating budget last year. So almost $500 million in new treatment capacity, which is definitely going to help. We also tackled the broader challenges of public safety in our communities. The people sent us an initiative around vehicle pursuits, and the legislature, myself included, voted to approve that initiative. So it ensures that our law enforcement have the tools that they need when there's someone dangerous out there to take them on. We also are expanding our regional training academies to make sure that we can get more law enforcement trained closer to home. This year in our budget, we actually are eliminating the match from our local governments to send folks to the police academy, because we know we've got a lot of agencies that just need to get staffed up. So law enforcement was a priority. And then we continue to tackle gun safety and the challenges of gun violence in our communities with a suite of measures. I'll just highlight a requirement that you report a lost or stolen gun within 24 hours, and some new requirements for folks who are selling guns to make sure that they've got the right security in place so we don't see guns trafficked into criminal behavior. We also continue to make investments in K through 12. We know that education is our pathway to economic vitality in the county, and we made a substantial additional investment in special education. We have more room to go there before we meet the needs of every one of our students, but continue to make progress. And then as chair of the Transportation Committee, can't leave that out. We face some real challenges in terms of our ferry system, and I was really proud that we're able to put another $200 million towards renewing our fleet to get 5 new vessels here in the next couple of years to add to our aging fleet. We also made even more investments in workforce to try and address the missed sailings that we've seen in the last year, to get enough backup crews so that if a sailing is at risk of being canceled, we can have some relief folks to help. We also are investing $100 million more into urgent preservation and maintenance of our, whether it's potholes or bridges that are in need of repair. We're putting additional priorities to that. And then public safety is a priority even in transportation. We made some additional investments in our state patrol. We've got, unfortunately, and we've seen it just in the last 2 weeks, really heartbreaking stories of loss on our transportation infrastructure, people driving recklessly and under the influence. So we're going to be adding over $30 million for additional traffic safety patrols and investments to try and tackle what we're seeing out on the highway. So those are some of the challenges and highlights. Certainly, I think we are all focused on the immediate challenges of safety, and then what can we do to invest in education and workforce pathways to keep us healthy and strong in the long term.
Well, that's a lot, and thank you. That was there was a lot of priorities that you got across the finish line, and we're so grateful for that. I'd like to know from both of you, how do you both work together to benefit the district? Can you talk a little bit about your partnership?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in. and I'm not saying this just because my dear senator's on the call and my friend, but we in the 21st are really, really fortunate. Marco, Lillian, and I get together once a week, once every 2 weeks, kind of depending on schedules, and really sit down and just talk about our priorities. We get there with staff, so we've got kind of all the things covered. We know what's happening in the district, what the concerns are coming in, but really we all get along. I think, I consider Marco a very close friend, Lily in the same way, I think, and that's not the usual in Olympia, even with a district that might have, all the same party representation. So we are just super fortunate in doing that, and then really fortunate in just our areas of expertise. Obviously, Marco is huge champion on deep knowledge on transportation. Lillian is an educator. So her work in both the education field and on the kind of on the law and or the labor committee is incredible. And then I chair the housing committee, and I used to be vice chair on the environment committee, energy and environment committee. So we have areas of some expertise. So I know when I have a transportation question, I know I can go to Marco. I trust him, and he can give me, the things that we need to look out for the district and for Snohomish County. Likewise with Lillian on education. So we work great together. I'm super proud of the work that we can do. We'll butt heads once in a while, without a doubt. We don't always agree on everything, but we trust each other enough to know that we can have great discussions and find out what's right. So I think you're well represented in the 21st.
Yeah, and I will just add that in addition to all that Strom just said, we also team up on some of our budget requests. So, for the 21st district, Strom and Lillian are requesting different things, and I'm requesting different things, so we can sort of maybe double dip in the pot a little bit rather than sort of competing over projects and priorities. And, that's where, if you look at our track record, just in the last 2 years and the operating or capital budgets, we've seen significant investments. And, I will say Strom, Lillian, and I care a lot about Edmonds, Linwood, Mukilteo, South Everett, but we also care about the broader ecosystem of the state and of the county. And I was particularly excited. We were able to get some funding to partner with Letty to do a great new kind of regional training center. And that technically isn't in our district, but I know all three of us were pulling hard to help get that funding. So in addition to our work on policy stuff, I think, and Lillian is the majority caucus chair in the House. I think between the three of us, we've got some great seniority, and we work hard to sort of bring some of those investments back to our district. So in addition to all the great policy work, we're trying to make sure that Snohomish County is benefiting from having some senior members of the legislature that can help drive investment back to our local priorities and needs.
From Wes Allen, from the Snow Isle Skills Center, he would like to know, with the funds that were generated out of the new capital gains tax, is there a discussion about continuing or growing that tax to continue to fund deficits in education for our state long term?
That funding is all dedicated to education and to early childhood care. There's some fluctuation to the tax. Obviously, people's capital gains sort of vary by year. And so the first bit goes to support K through 12 education, and then the variable part goes to school construction, so that we're not hiring teachers and then having capital gains be down in a particular year. I will say we are not at this point looking at expanding it. There is an initiative that would repeal the whole tax. And I think a focus of the legislature, that initiative came to the legislature. We declined to pass it because it would result in over $5 billion in cuts to our K through 12 schools statewide. And I think, folks need to be aware that that is going to be a question we're posed this November, because the legislature didn't act on that initiative. It's initiative 2109. It'll go to the voters. And Wes's point is incredibly well made, that we've got, some challenges in K through 12 funding. And while we're able to allocate more, we still haven't met all of the needs. And we've got some districts that are facing some tough choices. I was really proud to see Edmonds voters overwhelmingly approved the new school bond here. I think local voters are supportive of schools, but we've got some structural challenges in school funding we've got to work through. And if Initiative 2109, repealing the capital gains tax were to pass, a couple thousand people would get a tax cut, and 8 million Washingtonians would see cuts to our education system. So I'm hoping that we can keep that issue front and center, and the importance of funding our schools in front of folks as we make these decisions this year.
Okay, from Brock Howell, can you speak to some of the transportation projects that got shifted? Or which projects got shifted?
Yeah, we because of the breakdown in the supply chain and inflation that we've seen hitting the whole economy, have seen some substantial cost increases on transportation projects. And so we did have to make some tough choices. Thankfully, not ones here impacting our sort of core investments in Snohomish County, but we did have to shift around how we're going to deliver the I-405 corridor improvements. Again, there's a couple of projects we had to move out a little bit further in time, but those are out on the south side of the corridor, so kind of between Bellevue to Renton. So there's not really impact to Snohomish County. And then certainly, we face the same challenge. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but there are a couple of initiatives that are going to go to the voters. And, the Initiative 2117 would repeal our state's Climate Commitment Act, which would remove $5 billion again, this time from transportation funding, which, if that were to pass, would force really devastating cuts to the transportation system. So we were able to sort of rearrange how we're delivering programs this year to sort of meet the challenge in front of us, but again, hoping that voters don't make the problem worse by removing $5 billion for transportation funding with that initiative. I do, want to focus in the next budget on how do we actually double down on the investments we need here in Snohomish County. And we know with light rail opening, that's going to change the way people are moving around. And we got to make sure that we're investing in the transit connections to get people to the light rail. If you've driven by Linwood, you'll see that there's not enough space for 10,000 people to park or 20,000 people to park, but we want everybody using the light rail. So we need to make sure that community transit has the resources to connect people up from where you live to that light rail stop. So we're going to need more investments to make our system work here. We've also got the replacement of the US 2 trestle, which is a critical economic development and economic vitality need here in the county. And that project is not fully funded. So we're going to need to come back to try and assemble the long-term funding to finish that work. So this year we kind of were able to move the budget through a tough period, but we've got a little bit of doubt with this initiative on the ballot, and then some big needs that we need to continue to invest in as we move forward. So that's the best answer I can give at this moment, and certainly hoping that we continue to double down on our investments in our infrastructure.
Thank you. Strom, real quick, I know you have a hard stop. Can you just tell us one of your favorite personal moments from the session before you have to log off?
I can, but I was kind of hoping somebody would ask that. So this was the first year I presented at the PAGE program. So we have this incredible program. If y'all have kids or know if somebody who has kids that are like 14 to 16, they come down for a week, they do all this civics education, they run notes and they do things like that. But I went to one of the classrooms and asked the kids what they were working on. They work on bills. So one of the bills, Marco, was how do we change our funding for our transportation projects to make it more sustainable? It's like a 15-year-old kid. One of them was about housing and it was so impressive, this program. But these kids coming down from all around the state, working together, just getting to know each other for the first time. And by the end of the week, they're, the friendships that you see created and just the thought that's going into the work that we do in the state. We have a number of legislators that were former pages, a lot of staff that were former pages. So that was just a great moment. It was the last week of session. We were all exhausted, and it was like, oh, you get to that point, you're like, everything's going to, and then you meet a bunch of kids that are just super excited about civics and about state government. So it's like, so that was it. That was the number one. It's a great program. But I do, I have to jump. Thank you all for being here. Marco, good to see you. We'll see you soon.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thank you, Rep. Marco, so can you tell us some of the big issues facing our state that the legislature still needs to tackle?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we've talked a little bit about it, and I just want to thank Wes again for his leadership at the Skill Center. We have to think about this, K through 12 to workforce pipeline and how we are making sure that we're training the next generation of workers. There was a great article in the Herald, or maybe it was the Times, just in the last week about how you can go from being a barista to an aerospace worker in about 3 months. And, we need to do more to build those pipelines for particularly folks that are born and raised here in Snohomish County. I think about, how many folks have, built homes, saved for retirement, sent their kids to college on a great Boeing job. And we need to continue to make sure that that's not just Boeing, but our whole aerospace cluster, our new clean energy cluster that we're building here continues to be healthy and strong. And so school funding, when we think about the challenge with school funding, it isn't just about the parents and the kids that we care a lot about. It's also about the future of our workforce and the future of our economy. And Snohomish County has been known for generations as a place with the best trained workers. And we need to make sure that we're continue to invest in that K through 12 pipeline that gets kids, to graduation and beyond. We also have, as I've said, this sort of challenges with our infrastructure. And, I talked a little bit about the challenges that the state faces with our transportation infrastructure. We know that our counties and cities also are facing a lot of pressure around their infrastructure. There's another great story in the Seattle Times over the weekend about our work to replace salmon blocking culverts, which the state is under court order to do. And that article rightly pointed out that the state's making a lot of investment. What about the counties and cities that have culverts as well? And we need to think about a holistic solution that recovers our salmon and meets our obligation to our tribes. I also think, while we made some significant investments in fentanyl response, this is a problem that's going to be here for a while. And, if you follow the sort of trend lines, there are other synthetic opioids that probably are coming next. And so this challenge of really dangerous drugs in our communities is not one that it's going to go away in a year or two. I think we're going to have to see sustained investments in behavioral health and in treatment. And then once folks have gone through that treatment and are back on the road to recovery, we need to really think about sober housing and the kind of housing supports that folks will need to stay healthy and strong. And I know that the county and our cities are thinking about that, but we've got to, at the state level, think about how do we support that work in our local governments and provide more help so that we can keep people away from those challenges in the long term by giving them healthy and safe places to live. And then, we're a growing region. We're going to add tens of thousands of new jobs, and that means we're going to add tens of thousands of new residents to Snohomish County. People are voting with their feet already, and we continue to see folks moving. Our county is one of the top fastest growing counties in the country. So we've got to think about how we meet that housing need with housing of all types. And, we made some big reforms in the 2023 session. I think we've got to continue to double down on how do we make sure that we've got adequate housing, whether that's a starter home for families that are just moving here, whether that's a home that someone can downsize into. I look in my communities of Edmonds and Mukilteo, a lot of folks raise their kids in a big house and need something to step down into, want to stay in the same community where they've got their support networks. We've got to think about having kind of all those choices covered. And, and then the other piece is sort of how do we continue to address the challenges of climate change, but in a way that can create jobs and opportunity here. I'm so excited, and at Snohomish County is leading this exciting initiative to really try and see more of these clean energy jobs sort of take advantage of our trained workforce and our manufacturing know-how in Snohomish County. So we build great airplanes. We should also be building the clean energy infrastructure that's going to fuel our economy into the future. So I think having a policy like the Climate Commitment Act, where our state's largest polluters pay, and then we invest those dollars into clean energy workforce and jobs, is exactly the kind of model that we need to see in the long term. So those are just a few that I would think of. Certainly, I know in the chat there's other ideas. I saw a mention of apprenticeship pathways, and that's a great additional thing we need. You know, we've had apprenticeships in the construction trades for a long time, but there isn't any reason why we couldn't dramatically expand for our healthcare workforce, for our manufacturing workforce. That kind of earn while you learn model, really, particularly as we've got folks that are coming from low income backgrounds, or maybe you know, they don't have the generational wealth. They can't necessarily take time off to go to college and you know, sort of miss out on that earning support for their family. So these apprenticeship models where you can work while you skill up are a really great fit for a lot of folks in the community. Not to mention, you know, there's a lot of people that don't like sitting in a classroom staring at a chalkboard all day, and so, or a whiteboard all day. So having an opportunity to learn while you learn, I think, is a really great model. We should be looking for every opportunity to expand.
I couldn't agree with you more. EASC is also leading with the clean energy initiatives and the workforce piece, and huge champions of apprenticeship. So thank you very much for acknowledging that. I would love to know what your favorite personal moment during the session was.
Yeah, I my committee, we have a ranking Republican, Curtis King from Yakima, and every Monday we have dinner together after our committee hearing, and just sort of catch up on life, but also on sort of what are the issues that he sees coming up that might be a little controversial or tough, and we can actually spend some time kind of in a more relaxed, more comfortable setting, talking through kind of what are we working on together, what are the things where we feel like we could see some friction that we should kind of try and dig into and see if we can find some common ground. And we go to this quirky, Olympia is a college town, Evergreen State College is there. We go to this quirky, it's called Cascadia Grill, and the menu's like half vegan. And so I'm really proud that I've gotten our Yakima Republican, I've gotten him to eat Impossible burgers. I sort of coaxed him into it, but you know, he actually loved them, and so now he eats them occasionally. So it's been fun. We're kind of doing our little hippy dippy dinners on Mondays, but it's also a great chance to kind of de-escalate, because there are some things in transportation, most of it we agree on, but there are some things where we don't always see eye to eye, and we have a chance to kind of dig in a outside the camera glare, off TVW, talk through like, okay, what are the concerns you're hearing? What are some ways we can address them? And I think it's meant that if you watch the Transportation Committee, our work is it's probably 90% bipartisan. Our budget passed the Senate unanimously this year. And it just, you know, I think it's a real testament to particularly infrastructure, where our potholes don't have party labels, you know, our bridges aren't red or blue. We're able to work together on that. And I think part of that is that foundation of, you know, breaking bread together, eating an Impossible burger, and, you know, getting to know each other sort of a little bit outside of the sort of fight of the moment or the heat of the moment.
I love that you said that, because I think that most of our community, you know, as we're out talking to the business community, that's exactly what people are saying. They, you know, I don't know if they love their ear eating a soy patty, but I do. But they really appreciate folks that are trying to work together. And quite frankly, they have an expectation of that. And so I really appreciate that. And I know that our business community does too. So thank you. I want to throw it over to Shelley really quick. Do you want to speak to a couple of initiatives that you were championing and some of the processes that you were working through?
Yes, yeah. I know Senator Elias mentioned a couple of the initiatives, and I thought it may just be helpful to provide some more context for the group. So there were 6 initiatives that the people sent to the legislature. The legislature chose to take action and adopt 3 of them. The 3 that they adopted are the vehicular pursuits reform, the parental rights, and the ban on state and local income tax. The three that the legislature did not take action on and therefore will go to the November ballot are repeal of the capital gains tax, an opt-out for the state's long-term care program, and repeal of the Climate Commitment Act. And you heard Senator Leas mention, I'm sure you'll hear from others over the next several months. The three that are on the ballot for November have really significant implications for the state's fiscal outlook in the short term and the long term. So there'll be, I'm sure, lots of information for voters to consider when it comes to November. I have a question for Senator Leas, if I may be so bold. I know that there were a lot of announcements of retirements in the legislature, and so there'll obviously be turnover, new faces come 2025. There's also interim is the time when a lot of important work is done. And so I'm curious from your perspective, obviously transportation, there's so much need there, and that is your primary focus, being the chair. But from a policy perspective, what are you thinking you really want to, roll your sleeves up on and kind of dig in to prepare for the 2025 session?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, the bulk of my time will be spent on transportation. Like I said, we've got some big needs, particularly with the trestle, the additional transit investments we need to support light rail here in Snohomish County, those sorts of opportunities. Outside of transportation, I think a couple that we really need to dig into are continuing to work on housing together. Our county, as well as the central Puget Sound counties, will adopt comprehensive plans this year. So I think that'll give us a sense of where is growth going? How do we make sure that we meet this moment? And can we provide additional tools and support to our local governments to bring those housing units online that we need for our growing economy? And then the final one, I was proud, honestly, to vote to ban, to make it clear that we're not going to do an income tax, because I don't support additional taxes on middle-class families. But I do think we need to talk about our local government financing. And in particular, we have a 1% property tax limit that is having a really negative impact on our cities and counties, because, as much as it is unpleasant to think about property taxes going up more than 1%, the costs of delivering services are going up more than 1%. So when we only allow, if you're a business owner, if your revenue only goes up 1% and your costs go up more than that, it's going to force you to make tougher and tougher choices. And for county and city governments, that really is impacting public safety, because that is, for the county, I think 75% of the county operating budget goes to public safety. In our cities, it's not quite 75%, but still a significant chunk. So I think I want to think through, how do we engage the public? There was a lot of misinformation that said, oh, your property taxes are going to go up 3 times. And it's like, no, we're talking about maybe 2% or maybe 2.5% instead of 1% to give our local governments. And again, those decisions being made by our Snohomish County Council, by our city councils, just giving them flexibility to meet the needs that are in front of us. So I think, it's never popular to talk about taxes. I think we're seeing in our county some real challenges. I know our prosecutor wanted to hire some more prosecutors to deal with this huge increase in case volume, and county leadership had to say, I'm sorry, we don't have the funding to add the prosecutors you need. And we're seeing, City of Everett, I know, has had some really tough conversations about how they meet local needs and are looking at, maybe moving their library to the Snow Owl system, or looking at merging their fire department. Not decisions any city wants to make, but because of the fiscal challenges our local governments are facing, having to look at that. So I'm hoping we could spend some time kind of here in Snohomish County understanding kind of what the landscape is and what's the flexibility some of our local governments might need to meet these challenges, and then have a grown-up conversation about taxes. Like, none of us want to pay taxes. We all want everything for free, but we know, that if we're going to have high quality public safety services, we're going to probably need to make some investments. How do we do that?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I hate to switch gears because that's such a good topic, but we do want to know about the federal funding for infrastructure and transportation needs, and like how how are you taking advantage of some of those grant programs?
Yeah, Washington has been one of sort of punching above our weight. We have about 2% of our nation's population, and there's grant programs we're getting triple, quadruple that in terms of our share of funding. One great announcement just came at the end of last year. We received $600 million to support the replacement of our I-5 bridge at Vancouver. It's the only drawbridge between Canada and Mexico on I-5, a over 100-year-old structure there now. And that was a huge infusion of support. It'll be probably a $7 billion bridge by the time it's done because of the complexity of I-5 and replacing it. So we've gotten 600 million. We expect some more for that. So a great example of federal investment. But even on smaller corridors and in smaller places, we've seen, for example, out in Eastern Washington, we've got the state actually owns some of the rail infrastructure that moves our wheat to market, and it's called the Palouse and Coley City line that we acquired about 20 years ago. We invested as a state some money in that and got $70 million in grants from the federal government to upgrade some of that rail. And, you know, in Snohomish County, we're like, why do we care about short line rail in Eastern Washington? Well, you know, if you use a product that uses wheat, like, I don't know, if you eat bread or a cake, or, you know, think about all the other products, like, it really is important to have a strong agricultural supply chain. And a lot of the food we eat is grown in Eastern Washington. So the extent that there's, you know, transportation alternatives there that help move those goods, that supports all of us in the state, and it supports our export economy, which is creating jobs all over Washington. So those are kind of two examples, but we actually had an update from the DOT of all the federal grants we've gotten just since the bipartisan infrastructure law passed about 2.5 years ago. And it's, you know, in excess of $1 billion, closing in on $2 billion of competitive grants, not to mention that the bipartisan infrastructure law also increased just our usual kind of, they call them categorical, where you get a certain amount per population. Those grants have gone up as well. Part of that is going to PSRC, our local regional council that allocates kind of transportation funding to our region. Part of that to our DOT. So we're seeing huge new opportunities. And part of the reason why we're able to come up with $100 million for more maintenance and preservation of potholes and bridges in our state is because we're seeing all this federal support. So it enables us to invest more as well. So, you know, the bipartisan infrastructure law is exactly what we should see Congress doing, right? Just like we do. Senator King from Yakima and I sit down and talk across the aisle on our infrastructure. You know, having Congress sit down on a bipartisan basis, come up with the tools that can help us do the work we need to do. You know, that's the kind of model I'd like to see more of in Congress. And unfortunately, it looks like they fight all the time. It's important to sort of highlight the times when we are able to get some of that investment. Also, a good opportunity to just highlight Rick Larson, our local congressman for most of Snohomish County, or half of Snohomish County, is the ranking member on the Transportation Committee in the House. And then Senator Murray and Senator Cantwell both. Senator Murray chairs the Appropriations Committee. Senator Cantwell chairs the Commerce Committee that has a lot of impact on infrastructure. So our state is really well positioned as these bipartisan agreements are reached to benefit from those investments. And I know all three of them have been huge champions of replacing the trestle and making sure we've got resilient infrastructure in Snohomish County. All three of them have been huge champions of Sound Transit to get us connected to light rail. So I think as we move forward, we're going to continue to see federal investment, and we're going to see Washington punching above our weight because we're making the local investment. And, you know, you have to come up with matches, and you have to come up with a state commitment to get these federal grants. We're doing that hard work, and it's paying off.
And we are very grateful. That's it for our questions for you. Thank you so very, very much. We really are grateful to you, your service and your time, and looking forward to working with you all through the next session. Got some time,
Thank
right?
you. And thanks to Rashma and the team. I mean, you guys have been so fantastic throughout session. So always
Thank
good.
you. They are fantastic. Yeah, great work, guys. Again, thank you very much to our experts for joining us today. For those who registered for today's installment of Coffee Chats via Eventbrite, check your inbox later today, and you'll have a list of resources from the discussion as well as a link to the recording should you wish to rewatch it and to share it. Before we go, I have a few announcements from EASC. I hope you'll join me on March 21st. Economic Alliance is proud to host the annual State of Everett from 4 to 6 p.m. at the Everett Mall. I know. You'll get the mall vibes. You can join businesses and community leaders from across the region to join Mayor Cassie Franklin as she shares her direction for the city of Everett and highlights exciting revitalization efforts underway. And I don't know if you saw the new Trader Joe's that opened at the mall last weekend, but you can also pick up your veggies on the way out. Admission for the event will include a menu of upscale mall fare favorites, courtesy of Chef Dane Catering, a no-host bar with beer from Sound to Summit Craft Brewing, and an array of Washington State wines. Tunes from a DJ will complement compliments of the Everett Music Initiative and special exhibits featuring some of Everett's new businesses and landmark institutions. Scan the QR code on your screen now or visit economicalliancesc.org/events so you can register today. And on April 11th, EASC is partnering with the City of Snohomish, the Snohomish Chamber of Commerce, and the Historic Downtown Snohomish Association to present the Idea Forum. It's delving into the critical intersection of diversity, equity, and inclusion in economic development. You'll join community members at the historic Carnegie Building in Snohomish from 4 to 6 p.m. for a panel discussion featuring voices representing diverse perspectives from small business, education, workforce development, the arts, human relations, and local government. Together, we will examine the changing demographics in Snohomish County, the challenges posed by an aging workforce, and the pivotal role that DEI framework plays in fostering innovation, collaboration, and long-term community resilience. Also, you can just scan the code on your screen or check out economicalliancesc.org/events to RSVP today. And to conclude, please get your coffee mug ready. I'm not playing favorites with Everett Community College, but that is my standard coffee cup. And we'll adjust the framing so we can see everybody's faces. Cheers. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Senator Elias, for this awesome discussion today. And thank you for tuning in. And until next time, take care, everybody.